Following another crush through the Holland Tunnel, Robin dodged and weaved across the highways of central Jersey trying to make up time. His thoughts, however, remained in the downtown streets he'd just traversed. Now a Brooklynite, he felt like a visitor passing through Manhattan every morning. Yet those streets were as familiar to him as those where he'd grown up 250 miles away. He had arrived in New York in the mid-'80s after a bout of depression. His youth in suburban Virginia had been tedious, a tug-of-war between egotism and self-loathing. At 25, he already felt spent. Bullied as a child, he had sustained a chronic, draining self-doubt. His rich palette of traits, wit, talent, compassion, intelligence, pettiness, cruelty, arrogance, hypocrisy, had earned both friends and enemies. Failings aside, he radiated a warmth that frequently drew new people into his life. He was driven by a mindless, perpetual movement. Looming silently at the center was an empty chasm, a place he avoided at all costs. Motion provided evidence that something, anything, was happening. When nothing was happening, he felt worthless. As a child, even his triumphs were questioned. "Look, Dad, I got straight A's. So what do you want, a medal?" "You must have been a good little boy in class," his father would mock. "I see how you suck up, always looking for a pat on the head." Concealing this shameful hunger for approval, Robin had grown up feeling disingenuous and alone, even in the company of friends. No one could see any of this clearly except his sister Jill. Jill understood everything. In his adolescent suburban wasteland, he had pined for New York, the trope setting of Paul Simon's Only Living Boy in New York. It seemed a refuge for the lonely, a destination where people could go to be their lonely selves. It was where impassioned souls transformed disaffection into art, where brutality germinated beauty. He was also drawn to New York's anonymity, the very quality he hated about it now. The notion of gliding unnoticed through the teeming metropolis had appealed to his shyness. In later years, he had developed a public life in the city and thrived on it. Now fate had made him invisible again. He never unraveled the depression that had driven him north. He had crashed into a wall, cornered himself. He remembered feeling numb, lifeless. Tears randomly leaked from his eyes, but he couldn't define the pinch that was squeezing them out. Having left for the city without solving any of it, he brought his abstract quandary along like another piece of bulky luggage. He was like a foraging forest animal, proceeding on instinct without plan or analysis. Like so many others, he'd arrived broken in the land of the broken. New York didn't make him much happier, but he'd never felt more at home. His first place was in the barrio of Alphabet City at a time when it looked like Dresden after the Second World War. Gaping lots of rubble speckled the landscape in every direction. He shared the streets with rats, hustlers, shit gray pigeons, nodding junkies, and cops. After navigating the neighborhood for several months without getting mugged, he fancied himself streetwise. He was establishing a rhythm, but remained awkwardly out of sync with his surroundings. Music was happening all around him, much of it howling, maniacal, and prurient. He longed to partake of the misfits' paradise, but felt like an imposter, a hack. In those days, he lived with Janie, a college girlfriend he'd met in Virginia. Having been raised on the Jersey Shore, Janie knew Manhattan. She had found the fourth-floor walk-up sublet they shared. All Robin had to do was drive up and lug his guitars up the stairs. Earthy and warm, Janie laughed easily, but kept a corner of herself hidden, even from those closest to her. This gave Robin permission to do the same. Sharing a youthful ambivalence for commitment, they benignly tended to each other between occasional liaisons with other free spirits around town. Meanwhile, he was timidly probing the music scene he'd been following from a distance since his teens. The romanticized alienation of his youth took formidable form in the East Village. Virginia could be mean, ruthless, and intolerant, but East Villagers were flat out dangerous, like when Jim Bob Earth stabbed Robin in the leg with a penknife hurled from the stage after the chaotic frontman had used it to draw blood from his own cheek. He would hang around after shows, hoping to meet his heroes, maybe start getting his name around. But more often than not, he lurked in the back, hands thrust in pockets, invisible. Most of the performers weren't very friendly, but he nonetheless craved their approval. Like him, they were misanthropes seeking attention. It didn't make sense for them to be nice. Robin thickened his skin and kept exploring. He took in industrial noise bands, drag discos, angry performance artists crafting musical cadences to their diatribes while slathering their bodies with blood, candied yams, deviled ham, you name it. Performers wore their bruises like Purple Hearts. Any type of damage affirmed credibility here. Robin saw little of interest in his own suffering, but started performing anyway. His music was unlike anything going on around him. Was that good or bad? His guitar-based songs were unconventional and cleverly designed. Bandmates loved playing the tricky patterns, but the product could come off as smug, uninviting, obtuse. Robin hid in plain sight, hoping someone might care enough to come find him. He remembered feeling crushed after a pyramid gig that drew 6 people, none of whom embraced his nasal whine and eye contact with the floor as his band generated polymathic noise behind him. Like Robin the boyfriend, Robin the artist was still an unopened bud back then. His mind snapped back into the present as the Jetta wound across an overpass into a sprawling parking lot adjacent to the artless Soviet block-like building in which Robin made his banal contributions to the telecom industry. Late as hell, he snatched one of the half-dozen remaining spots in the back row. It was a hike to the door. He would need to jog while balancing a tepid black coffee he'd picked up at the gas station with his cumbersome shoulder bag. The office was in one of 7 virtually identical structures comprising what the entrance sign identified as a corporate park. The juxtaposition of words always provoked his disdain while driving past, but a case could be made for the term's descriptive accuracy. About 90 minutes west of the city, the park consisted of gray, featureless, 6-story edifices, seemingly dropped without thought on the landscape like bulky bags of garbage. Each was cordoned off by yawning vistas of parking lots, as if one day the site might host the second coming of Christ, or perhaps a Jay-Z concert. The bleak compound was ensconced in pristine oak and maple trees, punctuated with hilly rolling lawns and a crisp expanse of sky. The air smelled clean and green, an endless novelty for any New Yorker. Despite the lot's fullness, the place felt empty, silent like a crypt. Exiting the car required several moves as he placed each item, coffee cup, cell phone, satchel, on the roof of the Jetta. The sun was bright now, penetrating the chilly air to warm his face. He squinted into a breeze and took in for a moment the jumble of buildings looming in front of him like some dystopian emerald city. An impulse almost yanked him back into the driver's seat to turn the key and hightail it further west toward Pennsylvania. Instead, he exhaled, locked the door, and began gathering his things from the roof. I do it for you, buddy. It's not about me anymore.